Hey guys, it's Wawi, and today is a very long awaited day. This is probably by far the most requested tutorial that I've gotten since I started my YouTube channel, since I've started my Twitch stream, since I started making tutorials, since I started doing analyses. This is definitely the most common comment and question that I get so far. How do I do TKI? Not the player, the opening. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. So I guess let's get right into it. So I want to give a warning at the start of this video, which is that making a comprehensive guide to TKI 3 is pretty much impossible. It's such a deep opening with so many intricacies and variations and transitions and choices that you can make that it would be like making a chess tutorial on the Sicilian, right? Like, it's probably the most explored opening in the entire game. Like, how can you possibly explore every possible variation and make a comprehensive tutorial? It's impossible, right? So my goal in this tutorial is to give you enough that you can start playing around with TKI 3 yourself and that you understand the important themes that you should be trying to do when using this opening and why you should be using this opening and, stuff like that. So general themes. It is absolutely not going to go over every single variation, not even close, but I'm going to do the best I can. So what are the pros and cons of TKI 3? I almost didn't even want to put cons here, but because I mean, you know me, you've seen my videos, like I use this opening literally like every chance I get, right? It's amazing. So pros, it's the most flexible opening in the game. You can react to pretty much anything. It's very efficient, that it uses the first 3 T's as an attack, and not as part of the stack, ideally. It's easy to transition depending on the opponent, what the opponent's doing, whether they are, center forwarding, whether they are side forwarding, whether they're doing some other combo. If they're doing perfect clears, it'll deny the perfect clear because you can absolutely get the first T-spin in before they're perfect clear, unless they're significantly faster than you. It puts pressure on people doing BT cannons or DT cannons. It puts pressure on people doing trinities, any other kind of thing like that. And it'll give you lots of early pressure against any sort of fancy opening that people are trying to pull on you, or some sort of big combo. I mean, the goal of playing against any combo is to reduce the height of the combo, right? So this is perfect for that. Cons is that technically it's not guaranteed. It's not 100% guaranteed. We're going to talk about what to do in the case that it's not guaranteed. To be clear, it is guaranteed to be able to get a T-spin in the first bag, but it is not always guaranteed to do it using a TKI opening. You might need to use something else. And also, because there are so many variations, I'd say it's pretty much impossible to memorize them all. And so it sort of relies on you having a little bit of T-spin foresight, which we've talked about before in the how to do T-spins video. So it's going to rely a little bit on that. So I would recommend that you sort of have a basic ability to see T-spins in the mid game before you try to open with a TKI. Just my recommendation. So the basic setup. So I know that there are purists out there who are going to be like, there is only one TKI 3, everything else is a variation. And for those people, I have the path right here. Okay, this is the pure TKI 3, right? But I want to talk about sort of a more general idea of how we use the first 3 T blocks in general to send attacks, right? So I'd say the key distinguishing feature of a TKI is that you're going to need an I early because a lot of things are going to build on top of it. Specifically, the S and the Z are going to pretty much always be on top of it, right? And so these 2 at the top are going to be your first T-spin most of the time. There are rare instances in which you can put this O and this J in the other order, and obviously both of these setups can be mirrored. But for the most part, it's going to look something like one of these 2 cases, right? Which one of these cases you get to is going to rely a lot on whether you get the O first or the J/L first. By J/L, I mean it depends the opposite side on which your T-spin is there, right? So if your J is being used for the first T-spin, then depends on the timing of the O and the L. If it's the other way around, then it's the other way around, right? So from there, this is probably the more standard opener that you should try to go for if you can, because from here you can do something called a castle top. And the castle top means that, as you can see in this picture, if you take away this S piece, you sort of have a castle-looking formation. And this happens every time you have this 3 in a row and then 1 with 1 higher. You can get this castle top variation. So whenever you get this, the next 2 T-spins are very easy, right? Because you can sort of default to the vanilla TKI. So you always want to look for opportunities to apply this castle top variation, even if it doesn't happen after the first T-spin. So for example, once you get to here, this will be the castle top variation, but applied to the other side. So if you specifically were to start from this setup, then you would have an L piece here instead of this J piece, so it would be mirrored. And then from there, once you clear that T-spin, you're going to end up with something looking like this for your remaining T-spin. So you're going to put another Z piece on top, and then the S piece is going to have a hole under it, but then this T isn't actually placed yet. I think the ghost piece is kind of deceptive here. But once you clear this T-spin, you'll see that this hole isn't a problem. And in fact, after this specific variation, because of the 0-1-0 setup that you end up here, you can actually do a T-spin triple out of it. But I guess that's not something you should worry about initially. That's just sort of a cool side note. So let's say you don't get an opportunity to do castle top immediately. What you can also do after the first T-spin is place a S piece here and a Z piece here, and you can get another T-spin that way. So that's shown in this setup. So I guess this is the 2 branches that you would get out of the ideal TKI opener for me. Obviously, there are tons of variations. And for those of you who were watching my stream when I was creating this tutorial, you saw that as soon as I was done creating this tutorial, I went and played some games. And my first game, I did a variation that I didn't even talk about here, right? So keep in mind, there will always be lots of different variations. But this one is one, in my experience, that comes up a lot, where you have the S piece and the Z piece here. And then what I really like about this opening is you get 2 more T-spins afterwards, because as you can see on the left-hand side, I've used an L piece here, which means that you can put a J piece here, and then you're back to the castle top. So then instead of a TKI 3, you're actually getting 4 T-spins, which is really nice. So let's talk about the other case. So let's say the O piece comes really late, and you have to come up with something like this. So for those of you who have a little bit of T-spin foresight, you'll see that the most obvious is that if you get an S piece early enough, you can actually place it here in a way that creates another very easy T-spin on this side, which is what I've shown here. The only problem with that is that the third T-spin starts getting really ugly. And as you can see here, once I've completed this third T-spin, it's not as nice as this variation because there's going to be something covering the hole. This doesn't need to happen every time, but in my experience, it happens a lot from this setup where the third T-spin becomes not very doable. And for me, my recommendation, if you get to this setup, don't try to overly stress about being as efficient as possible. And if you need to go for a Tetris or something, that's completely fine. Know that it's possible to get the third T-spin, but it's not always the best choice. Alternatively, from this setup, you can be a little bit fancier, and you can do a super T-spin double, which is a much cleaner way that you can get the third T-spin. So I showed that over here. So basically what that's doing is once you clear the first T-spin, you're putting another S piece on top. So from this setup, it would actually be a Z piece on top, right? But if you mirror it the other way, you have an S piece on top. So from here, you would be able to do a super T-spin double by simply putting an I piece on top of either your J or L. So in this case, it would have been an L. I would have put the I piece here for this mirrored variation, but on the other side, it's on top of the J, and then you simply need a Z. So the key pieces here are the I, the S, and the Z, right? Or the I, S, and Z, but on the other side, in which case the Z would be the lower one and the S would be the one on top of the I. Feel free to replay what I just said if you aren't as comfortable thinking about the piece names in terms of their letters. You might need to replay that a couple times and sort of think about which piece I'm talking about. Ideally, you should learn to be comfortable with that terminology because that's how people talk about Tetris normally. But if you need to replay that last section of the video, that's completely fine. But you should try to get comfortable with that terminology so that you can talk about setups like this super T-spin double. That's what I mean here in this bullet point by STSD, by the way. That stands for super T-spin double. So that is this setup specifically, and that'll allow you to do 2 T-spins. So the first one will clear similar to a T-spin triple, and then you'll be left with a more classical T-spin hole that'll look something like this one. So this is sort of the basic setup of how you can get 3 T-spins with the first 3 bags pretty consistently. And even the variations that I didn't mention here, which once again, there are dozens and dozens of them, they're going to look something similar, or they'll have similar ideas to these variations. And the important part here is that you're trying to be as efficient as possible. Efficiency is the defining part of the TKI. So something to look for. So let's talk about a few of the fancier variations that you can go for once you start getting more comfortable with the TKI opening. Once again, this is very limited, but it's something you can look to do, and something similar to this will usually come up. And if you can do one of these setups, they're going to be just as efficient as the regular basic setup. It's just that sometimes stacking wise and in terms of the piece order, something more fancy will be more intuitive for you. But if you don't want to learn the variations, know that there's not really any advantage to clearing this way. There are some small advantages that you can get, which I'll talk about in a second, but for a beginner level, there's no difference in line sent between any of these variations and the original TKI, because either way, you're using your first 3 T-spins for T-spin attacks, right? So even something like a T-spin double, T-spin triple, T-spin single will send the same number of lines as just 3 T-spin doubles. And so in that sense, the macro perspective, there's no real benefit. And in fact, for the Imperial Cross setup that you can see here, there's literally no benefit because this is literally 3 T-spin doubles, right? So first, let's talk about the Trinity. So what is a Trinity? A Trinity is called that because it's all 3 kinds of T-spins in one setup. So here I showed a true Trinity, which wouldn't be used if you're doing the TKI Trinity variation, because as you can see, I've needed to use a T in my stack in order to set this up. But the idea of the Trinity variation of a TKI is that you do the same clears that you would do in a regular Trinity, but you separate them first, and then you set up the rest of the Trinity. So as you can see, this clears a T-spin single, followed by a T-spin triple, and then finally a T-spin double. And the defining part that you're looking for is stacking the S on top of the S here, or in the mirrored example, this would be the Z on top of the Z. And then finally, the I and the Z combination here, or the I and the S combination on the mirrored side. And those are the key factors. On the rest of the board, you're just stacking as normal. Those are the key pieces that you want to look for. Imperial Cross, we already talked about in terms of its usefulness, but the key pieces you want to look for are the L and the J, which are going to go in this sort of crisscrossy pattern, and then the indication that you can go for it are that this S has to come before the J, or if you're on the mirrored side, it would have to be the Z has to come before the L. Obviously, that's not strictly true because you can use a hold in some circumstances if they're close enough together. But that's sort of the general rule if you're going to look for the Imperial Cross. But the Imperial Cross is pretty much just there for fanciness. There's no real benefit to it. Finally, after the first T-spin double, you can actually set up a T-spin triple into a T-spin single. So how do we do that? Well, if you start from the normal setup, then what you can actually do is put an extra O piece on top on the side. So I didn't actually put the original starting position, but it was this, but like mirrored on the other side, right? And if you put another O piece on top there, and then do it like so, you end up with a T-spin triple into a T-spin single, right? And so the key thing to look for is an early O and then the S piece on top. And you can see this J piece being used here, or it would be an L on the other side. Or, the O piece and Z piece on the other side. Basically, all of these can be mirrored. That's what I'm trying to say. But why would we use this one or this one? There is actually a slight reason why you would use it. And that would be a very specific niche circumstance depending on who you're playing against. So sometimes if you're playing against someone who's significantly better in terms of pure APM output, as in they're just sending way more lines than you and are much more comfortable at being aggressive, but you are better at downstacking, then it can be to your advantage to send the same number of lines as them, but like offset in some way so that both of you end up with garbage and you can get to a point where you're downstacking sooner, right? Because if your strength is downstacking, you want to not be just canceling every attack that they're sending to you. You want to get to a phase of the game where downstacking is important so that you can use your strength against them. So as you can see here, the first T-spin double would be canceled, and then the T-spin triple would send them lines because they would do a second T-spin double, and a T-spin single would accept garbage for yourself, at which point both of you have sent the same number of garbage lines, but instead of it completely being canceled, both of you have a little bit of garbage on your field. The Trinity does the opposite because it does the T-spin single first, so it accepts garbage first. Then it does the T-spin triple, sending garbage to them, and then finally the last T-spin double will just simply cancel. So either way, you end up with garbage on your side. Why would you do one over the other? Because they can respond in kind. So if you're doing T-spin double to a T-spin triple to a T-spin single, maybe they'll do the same thing because they want to use their strength and they don't want to get to the downstacking game. They want to abuse their ability to send lots of lines. In which case you could use the Trinity to once again offset the garbage in some way, right? So that is the very niche example of why you would use one of these variations. But for beginners, it literally makes no difference because you're sending the same number of lines regardless. So transitions. Notice how I have no pictures here. Why do I have no pictures? Because as you can see, there's so many different ending positions that you would end up with after doing a T-spin or after using a TKI 3 that it's not even meaningful for me to put pictures here. So I'd say if you don't know what to do when you're done with the TKI 3 and you don't have much T-spin foresight, it's completely fine to just start going for Tetrises. And I mean, I even have a decent amount of T-spin foresight, and you'll see in a lot of my videos, I even go for Tetrises a lot of the time. And so that's a perfectly fine default to go to. What happens more common, I think, is that you'll start downstacking because likely if they're doing anything other than a TKI 3, or they're doing some variation that caused garbage imbalance, then downstacking is a good idea to clean up your field. And if you see an opportunity to chain your last T-spin into a downstacking combo, I think that's a very good option. That's probably the most common one that you've ever seen me do. I do that, I'd say, the vast majority of the time. Or sometimes it's even better to bail out of the second T-spin and go straight into a downstacking combo if they've done something like a perfect clear. Or something like that, and they've already sending you a lot of garbage. Definitely don't be hung up on trying to finish the 3 T-spins, right? That's not as important as not losing the game, right? It's not important for you to finish your opening. The opening is just a tool to get you in the mid game with as many options as possible, right? Obviously, if you want to go for more pressure, you can do more T-spins, and obviously there are situational perfect clears. Let me see, there's an example. This one, the reason I like this one so much is that if you put a J piece over here, this setup after the second T-spin actually very often goes into a perfect clear, right? You put a J, what would happen is you would have a J piece here, you would put the L piece flat and I on top, and then you just fill in this hole naturally. And this happens to me a decent amount, I'd say. So you can go for one of those if you want some fancy extra pressure. But I'd say those are pretty situational, and it's very unlikely that you have zero garbage by this point. So I don't think that the perfect clear happens very often. If the perfect clear is happening, it's usually because you're so much better than your opponent that you would have won anyway. So there's no point in really like obsessing over how to get the perfect clear, right? Because sure, maybe it'll look really fancy, you'll get some YouTube highlight or something, it'll look really nice, it'll feel really good, but you were probably going to win that game anyway if you're so much faster that you're able to get a situational perfect clear after a TKI 3. Yeah, it's just unlikely if the opponent is just as good as you. And I guess for me personally, I'm not interested in beating people who are better than me even harder. If I'm already beating them, then I'm beating them, right? I'm more concerned with what the best options are against people who are my level or higher than my level, in which case perfect clears are not really an option at the end of a TKI 3 because you're almost always going to have garbage. So this is the end of the tutorial. I hope that this was helpful for you guys. I know this is the most requested video I've had. So I guess notable players that use TKI that you should look up, other than TKI himself, who of course the opening was named after. You can look at my videos. Blink uses TKI a decent amount. Firestorm uses it a lot, and Firestorm is one of the best players in the world right now. For sure, he's probably top 5. And A2K does it a lot, and I really like watching A2K in particular because he is very consistent. He's one of the most consistent top-level players. If you really want to do TKI, I do recommend you watch videos for it because, as I said, this is far from an exhaustive list of variations. And I'll probably make a video on some more advanced variations at some point. I actually forgot to fill out the next tutorials part, which is kind of awkward, but I'm not going to redo the whole video just for that, right? But, you know what I'm going to do. I'll make some more openings, maybe some mid-game ideas, maybe some what to do in hurry-up garbage. There are all sorts of tutorials I can make. Not going to redo the whole video just because I forgot to fill in that. You guys already know, right? So I guess that's it for the tutorial. Once again, watch players, watch Eitsu and Firestorm especially. They have a lot of good variations that they do. Heibo sometimes does TKI, but most of the time he just goes straight for Tetrises because he likes the offset garbage, and for him that's the most consistent way to do that. Wumbo sometimes does it, but Wumbo does anything at this point. I feel like he used to be a center forward one trick, but he's been doing a lot of other things lately. But yeah, look forward to that, and I hope this helped you guys. See you guys in the next video. Peace out.